Well, hey there, it's that coding guy here, breaking it down and making it accessible. Welcome back to my Dungeon Keeper series. In this video, we're going to talk about posting rooms to our service and persisting them in our Postgres data store. I'll kick off this video as I normally do with some Git work because I like to showcase good habits and a workflow that you can use even if you're working by yourself in order to build good Gitmanship habits. So one thing I surprise people with sometimes, a little secret trick, is if you navigate to the directory your code is sitting in, like I have here, my Dungeon Keeper demo application is sitting in here. It's a folder on my desktop. But if you right click here and do a git bash here, and that opens up a git bash window right to that directory. So you don't have to worry about changing directories, cd this, cd that. Bang, I'm open right up, and I'm sitting on the last branch that I was working on, which is the data branch from my last video. I'll go ahead and create a new branch to do our work here today. And I'll call that posting. And now we're set to rock and roll with some code. I'm going to swing into the controller here because what we've got to do is we've got to add a controller, we've got to add a service, and we've got to add, well, we don't actually have to add anything in the repository, as we'll see. So I'll create a method here inside our REST controller, our room controller, and that will set up an endpoint to allow the post. So I'll use the annotation post mapping here. Much like the get mapping above, that is going to signify that this method is going to fire when we post. The return type for our method is the next thing that needs to go here. Now, for get rooms, we are returning an iterable of room. When we post a new object, RESTful best practices say that we should return that same object that was provided to us with the ID from the database. So that means our return type here should be room, right? We're posting a room, that's what we're going to return. Now, we can use whatever method we want here. We can call this whatever we need to. I'll just go with create room, and I will call the service. So we've got room service set up here, and we'll call the room service dot create room as well. All right. Now, this is yelling at me because we don't actually have this over there on the interface or the implementation yet. So that's cranky. And the method now is cranky because I didn't actually return anything. So we can return the result of create room. That sets us up pretty good there for the moment. And next, we'll go ahead into the room service, this interface, and also add the create room method. All right. And when we switch over to the implementation file, we can see that it's a little angry, saying, hey, you know, you've got this create room method in room service, but you haven't implemented it yet in here, so what gives? So I'll go ahead and hit Alt-Enter here and select Implement Methods, and go ahead and hit that guy. And that creates the little shell for us here for the create room method. Now it's returning null, but what we want to do is probably return the results of room repository.save. Now we've set these up, but we haven't actually talked about what we need to provide the controller, because the thing about a post request is it's using the post verb, it's using the address or URL of /rooms. Because we didn't specify any additional address information in this post mapping annotation, it's going to just use /rooms as the address for our post. And that's best practice for RESTful practices, using a post at the root of the object there. But what we need to do, because a post, not only do you have the verb and you have got the address correct, but you're also providing a body in the JSON method there. So what we've got to do is provide a way for the service to grab onto that. And what we'll do is do at request body, and we will say room, and that is going to capture the JSON, and Spring will throw it in this variable for us. So this is the thing that we want to pass to our room service. Right? We get that from the calling client, and then we'll pass it to the service and say, hey, post this thing, or persist this thing. But we haven't told the interface to expect that, right? Expected 0 arguments, but found 1. That's because we didn't put any arguments in here. We didn't tell it to expect 1. So we'll go ahead and add room and save that. And similarly, over here, we didn't actually add this to our parameter list, right? So room, and that thing is what we want to pass to our repository. We're saying, hey, room repository, save this thing, and it is going to contact the database on our behalf. That's an HTTP call. Even though it doesn't look like it, that's what's happening under the hood. And the framework is managing all that. Thank you, Spring. Right? We don't have to worry about the connections and everything. That it's managing with the database and sending that over there, getting the results from that query and everything. It just does it all for us. Right? It's the benefit of using a framework like this. So I think this looks pretty good now. But we'll give it a whirl, and that's going to be the ultimate decider here. So I'll go into our Dungeon Keeper application and start that from one of those play buttons there. Got that starting up. Looks like we're okay. Bring up Postman here. It's the industry standard tool, I would say, for testing your own server code when you're writing a backend. And I've got the verb changed to a post. I've got the address still at the root of rooms there. And now we need to provide a body. So I clicked on the little body here. We're going to go over to raw, change it from text to JSON. And now I need to think a little bit about what I actually have to provide this thing. So I'm going to go look at the actual room entity here, because this is what we said we're passing in, right? We're passing in a room. So what do I need to provide to a room for it to be valid? It looks like we've got an ID. I don't need to worry about that on a post, because best practice is the database is going to figure that out. So all I really need to provide at the moment is a name, which is a string. So I'll come in here to our Postman object, our request object, and I'll open up a blank object there, right? There's two things that we can have here in JSON as our root object. It can either be a single object, like one thing, or it can be an array. So we're not trying to post multiple things. And that's why I'm using object literals here. And this is just JSON now, right? We're using key value pairs. So I'm saying the name of this object is going to be, this is a Dungeon Keeper application. We will use Armory. All right. And let's give this a whirl. Looks like we got 200 OK, and we got the ID of 3 and the name of our Armory. Now, the ID of 3 I expect, right? Because as we talked about before, we do have a little bit of helper code in here that is saving 2 rooms automatically every time the server starts. So this is in fact the third ID. It's the third room in our database. And we got the name of Armory, which is what we wanted. And we're getting a 200 OK. Now, RESTful best practices says that while this is a successful response, when we create a new object, we should use the 201 created status code. So in order to do that, we will come back here and actually, we'll go ahead and give this a Google. Let's see if we can find this. SpringBoot return 201 created from controller. This looks promising. Request mapping, response status. I'll exit those cookies for the moment. So this looks like the code that I was pretty much using. We've got some method in our controller. We've got a response body. We've got kind of a request mapping. We're using the post mapping. And then response status. Well, let's try this. So we'll swing in here and we'll say response status. And it looks like we need to pull that in from our Spring framework. So I'll hit Alt Enter there and import class. And what that did was import that guy up there so we can use it. And I said, I don't really want OK, right? That would be the 200 status, which we would use for a get or something like that. But I want something more along the lines of created. So if you've heard me talk in my other videos, sometimes I like to just erase everything and put a dot and see what my options are, right? I'm leaning on this IntelliSense to help me out. So HTTP status codes, we've got accepted, we've got OK, bad gateway, bad request, conflict, all of these things found, no content, not found. If you've ever seen a 404, we've also got created. So let's give this a whirl. I want to use that guy. Save that. We'll rerun this. Looks like it started back up successfully. And once again, we've posted those original 2 from our service, right? So if I was to open up this other tab and do localhost 8080 and we do a get, this is basically getting everything in the database. That's not going to work because I didn't say /rooms. All right. So we're getting back the abandoned barracks and the throne room from our original. Now let's run this post once again, right? And you can see down here in my server log, it actually says hibernate insert into room. That means the database just ran this query for us. And now if we rerun this get, we've got the Armory in here. And did it work? Yes. We've got that 201 created as our status code now. So, the original one was working with that 200 OK status code, but best practice, 201 created, that's a signal to yourself and other developers that, hey, a resource was just created in the database, right? We just created this room. It's a brand new record in the database. And if you're curious as to like, why did we post a new one and it came up ID 3 again? That's because whenever we restart our server, we're wiping out our database. And that's because we have the create drop sequence set here in the application YAML. So if that's confusing you, every time we restart this service, we're dropping everything in the database. The tables are getting regenerated, and then this guy, as the last step, is adding those 2 base rooms in for us. And the reason I did that was just so that we would have something to get in our first videos. So we have gone full slice here, right? We went from the room controller. The room controller calls the room service, the create room method there. We're passing the room that we got from the request. We're passing that into our service here. And then we're calling the save room method provided by the repository. And we didn't implement that ourselves, right? If we go to room repository, that thing isn't there. Like, that method is not there. We're inheriting that from the CRUD repository. And if you want to take a look at that, you can always control-click. And if you've downloaded sources, that'll pop up on the right. If you haven't yet, you can download all of the helpful comments on the code, and you'll see all the things that we're inheriting for free in the room repository. So I'm going to go ahead, like that's the crux of it. I'm going to go ahead and finish up my development here. I've created a new method, a couple of new methods here, but I haven't documented them. And so let's do some polish. So we can do /$ and hit enter. That's a little template there. It's creating our Java doc for us real quick. It automatically detected this guy as a room parameter. So I'll pop that in there for us. So remember, best practice on these is to document what happens, but not how, right? So what does this method do? Calls the room repository to save a new room to the database. And the parameter is the room, and I'm just going to do a dash and say, and now describe this parameter, the room to persist to the DB. All right. So that looks good. And we can come back to the room controller. Looks like neither of these were Java docked. I guess I didn't do my polish path well enough last time. All right. And that's another benefit of doing this. Like sometimes we go back and we find stuff that we missed. So we can do, let's see, defines the post endpoint for rooms. Good stuff. Room to persist. And I think I left a period off on the other one. I'm looking for consistency here, even in this little stuff like periods. And this guy did get all rooms, defines the get all rooms endpoint. Cool. Did that, and I'll go ahead and for sure I'll do a reformat code. I'm going to optimize imports, rearrange entries, and clean up code, and run that. And that just ran code styling and remove imports on all of my files. And I will go ahead and git add -a. We're adding every change that we just did to this. Let's commit. with a message. And these should generally be helpful and describe the work that we just did. Added functionality for posting new rooms. Full slice. Full slice through our back end, that is. That's good. And then finally, we will git push origin posting. Probably heard me say this before, but highly recommend getting used to git bash on the command line if you're new to development. It's a struggle bus at first, I'll admit. It can be kind of confusing, but once you get the hang of it and know your way around a handful of rather simple commands, you'll be very powerful, and it'll help you have a good understanding of what you're actually doing. You know, we've got this stuff over here in IntelliJ where we can do all of these things by clicking, but I think having to type those out and really think about which commands you want to run, seeing that there in the terminal, it's going to make you better overall. That's my opinion anyway. That there is posting a brand new room to our service and having it persist it to the database for us. And hey, if this content is helpful, please shoot me a like on the video or enter in a comment. Not only does it help the channel from YouTube's algorithm perspectives, but it also lets me know that it's being helpful to you and that you would enjoy seeing more content in this vein. And that would be great. So cheers.